Okay, finish up whatever it is you're working on, and let's go ahead and start the reading. If your microphone is still on, you can turn that off now, and we'll get started. Caleb, do you want to call out the names?
Yeah, so first up is Georgia.
Okay, so this is kind of a vignette, and here it is. Bill held Candace's waist and hoisted her over the edge of the fence. Candace laughed at the wind as it blew through her hair. I suppose Candace and the wind are alike. Both are fickle and unreliable. Who are you, Leonardo DiCaprio? I smirked at Bill. Rose, me Rose. Candace threw up her arms and pretended to fly. A 5-year-old whose favorite movie was the Titanic. I'm not the one who has a Spice Girls CD in my room. Bill snapped back at me. Get off your rumps and feed the chickens, you slackers. Mama called through the barn door, which she was opening to let the cool breeze in. Come on, you lot. I tapped Candace on her thigh. She immediately sprang down from her perch on the top of the fence. Tap thigh, as we called it, meant race you. We both sprinted off to the chicken coop, Bill whistling jauntily behind us. I jogged, watching Candace skillfully jump over small hedges, and we both skidded to a halt at the coop. The sun was setting in the distance, dyeing the sky around 13 shades of orange. Did you know I hate citrus fruit? Bill asked as the three of us began sprinkling feed over the grass. Kevin the rooster nudged Matilda the hen out of the way, lunging for the food. I've lived with you your whole life, goofball. Of course I do. I playfully tossed some feed at him. Bill picked up Candace, who was now laughing hysterically at my remark. They're just so zesty. Bill shuddered. A little bird, red-chested and brown-feathered, darted through the air like a rocket. It settled on a feeble branch and began hopping around nimbly, its eyes twinkling with mischief. Birdie! Candace shrieked. She ran around, flapping her arms and making tweeting noises. Bill and I followed suit. We twirled around the fire pit, glided over the tiny creek bridge, chased each other to the swing. Bill lifted Candace up on it, and he and I began pushing Candace back and forth like she was a sack of potatoes. I laughed and could feel the wind blowing through my hair.
Great, thank you. So I think there is maybe no form more suited to an expression of lightness than the vignette, which is not a which is almost by definition a kind of lighter version of the story. So you did a really great job, I think, of expressing lightness, or rather describing it, enacting it. There's a lot of bird stuff going on, not just the literal birds that are hanging out, but the characters in the vignette are doing bird-like things. At one point, one of the characters is described as being on a perch. She's sitting on top of the fence. But the fact that you describe that moment as a perch gives this feeling of kind of almost bird-like lightness. The verbs in your vignette also do this. The jumping, the tossing, the twirling, the gliding, the lifting, and then there's also the motif of laughter, the laughter and the wind kind of becoming synonymous throughout the vignette. That happens at least 3 times. So yeah, the convergence of laughter and wind is very effective description, I think, is really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Some great lightness.
Okay, so next up is Anya.
So I have 2 poems that I wrote, and they're both pretty short, so is it okay if I read both of them?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so the first one is called No Walls, No Limits. My school has no walls, no limits, they say. There's only partitions and dividers reaching up chest high, like cubicles, making spaces of uneven sizes. Air flows through the big area we call a pod. Voices echo off the walls. There is laughter and movement, and out the windows, where sun streams in the morning, we can see our new building, a monolith with walls. Does it have limits? So that's the first one. And then the second one is called Rosy Lips of Twilight. The rosy lips of twilight kiss the town, kiss the chiming bells of the church, wherein stained glass casts stories onto the floor, kiss the sloped roofs, old red tiles glowing in the light, kiss the lake, boats rocking in water that glistens quietly, the cobbled streets, the vibrant window boxes, all touched. The rosy lips of twilight gently kiss the town, and it feels like it will never stop.
Great, thank you. So the lightness in both of those poems comes both as a kind of formal reality and also an imagistic one. So let me talk about the second poem first, the Twilight poem. The poem itself has a kind of lightness in that it's very short and that it moves quickly through space. So it never lingers in any given area of the town very long. Its descriptions are very brief. The poem itself, as a formal unit, moves lightly. It moves, you might say, like the light of twilight, jumping from image to image, object to object, place to place. So that was, I thought, a very effective formal use of lightness or embodiment of lightness. The first poem almost had the lightness comes in the form of the poem, but the imagery of the poem is almost ironically light, so that there is a kind of weird. I mean, with the cubicles and the absence of walls is almost ironized by these kind of by the building that comes in at the very end, the very heavy, ominous image that comes in. So there's a contrast between the form of the poem, which has a kind of lightness, and the heavy final image of the poem that I thought was very effective. So that was really great. Yeah, thanks for sharing this. I especially want really to encourage you to continue the lightness of movement, the kind of fast-paced poem that moves through space and time very quickly. It's great.
Thanks, Anya. Next up is Emma.
Okay, so I wrote a story and I don't have a title for it yet, but I was wondering if one reason I wanted to share this was because I wanted to really know if I really did a good job of using lightness in it, because I wasn't so sure, but this is what I have. I was flying. It felt like I was floating on the water, but this time without sinking in, without coming up coughing and spitting. I didn't know how to fly, but I didn't know how to swim either. Flying was easier though, because when the wind lifted me up, it didn't feel like a hurricane. It didn't feel like a menacing and strong wind because it was lightly tossing me onto the fluffiest air ever, and suddenly I was floating. I was hoping somewhere my family would be floating, and I knew they were probably somewhere flying, feeling the most comfortable they had ever felt. And as the wind carried me away, I fell asleep. I woke up and there was no more soft air. I was in the hurricane again, and I was being swirled and tossed like fruit in a blender. Somehow I was enjoying it, because while I was floating, a tiny pocket of my brain had been thinking, this isn't right, this isn't real. And when I stopped floating, when I just started being tossed around the hurricane, I realized that if the flying wasn't real, then my family was probably gone. Hopeless, scared. And here I was, unable to help them. And then I was falling. The hurricane tossed me towards the ground and I was sailing down until I stopped. And I realized I was with the sun, and it was real even though it seemed like it wasn't. And the sun said, "Are you lost?" And I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the sun that I wasn't lost, that a stupid hurricane had taken me away from my family, but I couldn't speak. The sun somehow tossed me inside of it, and when I was inside, I saw infinite space and a lot of people. Everyone, my family, my friends, people I didn't know. And then we were pushed through the other side of the sun and we seemed to be in our world. I suddenly forgot about the trials of the hurricane and how I was just tossed into the sun. I didn't care because at that moment I was happy and I felt like I was floating for real.
Great, thank you. Okay, so first of all, that reminds me a lot of the some of the poetry that was being written in France in the late 19th century. Some of this what they call the symbolist writers. Uh, Rimbaud is one of them. You might look into some of his poems. He's really great. Okay, so you do a bunch of really amazing things in that story. Maybe it's a story, maybe it's a poem, maybe it's a vignette. It begins. You do a couple things with lightness, but the poem. I'm going to call it a poem because it feels like a poem to me. But it moves between lightness and heaviness in a way that's really interesting. First of all, it occupies or evokes the logic of a dream. And this is what I mean by that. I don't mean the surreal imagery. I don't mean the kind of fantastical elements of the story or the poem. What I mean is that the speaker of the poem is reduced to the position of a mere observer. So the speaker seems to have no agency of her own. She is tossed by this kind of hurricane, tossed by the wind into the sun, into a room. So that's what I mean by the poem evokes the logic of a dream, and in that way, the poem has a kind of lightness, right? That we as readers feel we are also being kind of tossed around here or there. You of course use several words that evoke kind of lightness, a flying, a floating. There's almost a hopefulness that begins at the beginning of the poem. And you also do a really interesting thing with description where you describe things in the negative, which is a very unusual thing to see, where you say not it felt like this or that, but it did not feel like this or that. So there are some moments in the earlier part of the poem where you say it didn't feel like this was happening, I was moving, I was tossed here and there, or I was flying, or maybe I was floating, but it didn't feel like what's the line? It didn't feel like a hurricane. At first, the speaker says it did not feel like a hurricane. It did not feel like swimming or something. So there are these kind of negative descriptions which do indeed give the poem a kind of lightness. That kind of negative description. It's really rare to see that. It was really great. That's wonderful. And then there's a turn that happens in the poem where suddenly the speaker feels hopeless or scared. The speaker seems to realize that this isn't right, this isn't real, what's happening to me. And then that shifts again when the speaker is tossed into the sun and then eventually the room. So the poem absolutely employs a kind of lightness in how quickly it moves and how quickly it shifts. There's something so easy about it, so freeing. And I would definitely use the word effortless. So it was really great. It was really wonderful. Thanks. Yeah, it's very shifty. That's something I absolutely associate with lightness, kind of quickness. It's great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Next on the list is Aditi.
Okay, so I wrote a poem and I titled it Fly. Bouncing off the white fluffs, she went into the air, gliding and soaring with the expressionless winds, gliding and soaring with the youthful cheers, gliding and soaring with her arms wide open, large and welcoming, leisurely chirping with those around her, flying in a place where judgment drowns and uniqueness is heard. Bouncing off the white fluffs, she went into the air, gliding and soaring, free at last.
Great, thanks. So yeah, you also use the image of flight to give us this sense of lightness. The flying becomes depending on how you're describing the flight, we understand the flying as both a literal flight moving through air and space, and also a kind of metaphorical flight. There's the moment where you talk about judgment. How do you put it? What's the line about judgment?
Flying in a place where judgment drowns.
Judgment drowns. Yeah. So there we feel that the description of flight is a kind of metaphor for freedom or for escape, for some kind of emotional or psychological liberation. It's really great. Thank you. And that's often how lightness works in literature and in art and in music also, that it's a metaphor for liberation or freedom. It might be a metaphor for triumph, for overcoming some kind of obstacle. So that's really great. It's great also how you leave out the object of you could say the object of capture, or the obstacle to freedom, and we just get the kind of pure experience of flight. It's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, Georgia put it well in the chat. I think someone breaking through a barrier. It's great.
Thanks, Aditi. Next up is Liam.
All right. I just wanted to preface this saying that I'm not entirely sure I did the lightness theme, because I have a very hard time writing about happy things. But okay. So Biggie says, his burnt brown potato face smothered in grease. It takes me a moment to realize he's addressing me. How are you liking the new digs? Prison treating you well, Charlie Brown? I keep my eyes trained on the table as I respond. Better than a 5-star resort, I mumble quietly. It's a fine table. They've even set it with the golden type of silverware, with forks that shimmer under the dullest of light, and spoons that are carved with ornate weaving patterns of flowers and sunlight. I almost catch myself grinning, the way my lips are twitching into a dimpled, lopsided curve, but I take a deep breath and the joy is gone. You're in a prison, I think, a state penitentiary. There are no flowers and no sunshine and no gleaming forks and no fancy spoons. A resort, the boy says, Biggie shouts incredulously, spraying chicken bits all over the display of pastries and thin little saucers. The entire room dissolves into hearty laughter, covering the walls in a thick and sour grime. Somebody hammers their fist down onto the table, sending a knife flying across the room and lodging itself into the floral wallpaper. Another starts pounding his old wooden chair against the floor, howling like a klaxon. They're drunk as dogs, the lot of them. I remain seated like a schoolboy, with my hands all tucked into my lap and a napkin draped properly over my legs, and they guzzle down beer and shout and make a mess of things. One more day, Ben. Just one more day and they'll all be dead. I bite my lip, savoring the thought of watching Biggie writhing around on the floor, howling not in amusement, but in agony. And I'd take one of these perfect little knives and Ben? I whirl around in my seat, at first alarmed, but then annoyed when I recognize the pinched little face pressed up against mine. Dorothy, my counselor. Ben, it's time to go. I frown, glancing back at the table, which has been turned into a slaughterhouse of splattered food and spilled glasses of water. It looks like the remains of a tea party after an atomic explosion. In the middle of it is Biggie, who is fighting one of the guys from my sector. Robin Velasquez is his name, a hunk of blonde hair and meat and ink, who had spaghetti for brains, with a cucumber and a half-devoured chicken leg. I turn back to face her. In case you couldn't tell, I whisper, I'm in the middle of something. Dorothy fixes me with a hard look. A bar brawl, she asks quizzically. Gee, you must be all booked up for the night. Now get up. The boss wants everybody back to their quarters to plan for tomorrow. I roll my eyes dramatically. Tomorrow, I mock her. That's what you always say. And then you come back here every night to tell me to wait. Just one more day, and then we'll break you out of here. And what for? You take my cash to buy yourself freedom and then snatch yourself a job here and then leave me for dead? You know that's not true, Ben. My eyes glint with hatred. Do I? There's a moment of silence between the two of us. My fingers are wrapped around the table in a death grip, turning the skin sheet white. Dorothy steps back, almost like she's about to say something, when I suddenly realize something. The room has gone silent, dead silent. Slowly, I turn around in my chair, mortified. The entire room heard everything I just said.
Great, wow, thank you. All right, So first of all, I just want to say generally that the prompts are merely a jumping off point. I don't expect you to adhere to them in the way that you might think I want you to adhere to them. So as far as lightness goes, Liam, actually, I would say, generally speaking, that I've now, I think, heard you read 3 or 4 times. I would say, generally speaking, lightness is a word that I would use to describe your writing. And it's not because you write about happy things. I wouldn't say that lightness is associated with happiness. This is partly why I wanted to use the example of the devil in Milton's Paradise Lost. The devil is not a happy person in Paradise Lost. Satan is not a happy person. He's not a good character, but he is a light character in the way he thinks and the way he moves. So the way that I would describe your writing as being light, not just in this piece but in other pieces, is the movement of your writing. So your writing has very fast pace. It often interrupts itself. So even in that piece that you just read, you begin in media res, a conversation is going on. That conversation is immediately interrupted by the protagonist's thoughts. It then interrupts itself again with a description of the table. The table also is a kind of physical embodiment of lightness. It is bright, it's shining, it is ornate. So this constant shifting that you do in your writing, this associative movement where a physical description will produce a kind of emotional meditation in the part of the protagonist, the shift between the physical and the mental, between the objective and the subjective. I would say that your writing has a kind of light, it has a buoyancy almost, right? In other words, it never lingers too long on one thing. That's something we'll talk about when we talk about heaviness, is oftentimes in heavy writing, you see really long sentences, really intense descriptions that go on and on and on and on. But your writing is moving, it's a lighting on things very quickly. So that's, I do think of that as a kind of lightness. And even in this scene, you have the knife and the fists and the banging and the clatter and the beer and the kind of food fight that's going on. And right in the middle of it, the primary character is thinking, is stagnant, sitting, and all this is going on around him. And he's there just kind of quietly observing. So there's kind of lightness involved in that as well. And then also how you use short sentences, it causes the pace of the story to move very fast. So that's the other thing that I would say about your writing generally, is it's very fast paced. So yeah, it was really wonderful as always. And I do indeed think there's quite a bit of lightness going on. Maybe not happiness, but lightness. Yeah. I'm constantly trying to get my students at the university to write faster, to get their writing to happen faster. It's not easy to do, but that was a great job. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. And that's actually it for today, because Sophie didn't want to read anymore.
Okay. So we're at the end of the list.
Yeah, but I just wanted to add that Connor has told me to add sunlight into my writing before. So
let some light in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think Helen would like to read.
Oh, great. Yeah, Helen, go for it.
Mine's really short. But it's about flying. As she leapt, she felt herself rising towards the clouds and beyond, higher and higher, towards the sky and sun, up and up, farther and farther.
Great, thank you. So that is it's another. It's similar to some of the other works that we've heard today, in that it utilizes flying as a way to enact lightness, so that we feel kind of lightness. The thing I like about that poem as well is it reminds me of the William Carlos Williams poem, because it doesn't give us any information other than the image. So it doesn't explain the image. It doesn't tell us how we got there or where we're going to end up. There's no analysis, there's no philosophy, there's no wisdom, there's no epiphany. There is just this very quick, fast image of flying in this case. So it was a really wonderful thing. That's something I like. I would also say, Helen, that your writing, now that I've heard it, I think 3 times as well, is also characterized by a kind of lightness. That you tend to write very short, very imagistic works that happen fast and move fast. And what you do well is you don't explain anything for us so as we as readers are left to think for ourselves, to apply meaning to the images that you give us. So it's really great. So today I told you that oh yeah, Senna, did you have a question?
Can I read too,
yes.
or no?
Yes, please go ahead.
Or are we over time?
I think we are over time, but if
Okay.
others want to leave, they can, and you can read, please.
Mine is also kind of about flying. Wind and sun shining through the leaves on the trees. I could grow wings if I wanted to, but right now I just want to stand in the wind. This is a place for singing and almost flying. I can fly here, and the only reason I don't is because I don't want to. Thank you, Maple, for being the way to this place. Thank you, sun, for shining and making the leaves so golden green. Thank you, whoever built this roof at just the right angle to stand on. Thank you, wind, for blowing in a flying way. Thank you, world. My sister says the roof could fall in, but I know it won't, because if it was going to, it would have already. And anyway, I can fly if I want to, so it wouldn't matter if it did. One of those little cabbage moths is flying by, and I know its babies will eat the garden, but I don't care, because when they grow up, they will fly, and right now, that's all that matters.
That's amazing. Thank you. So just 2 things I want to say about that really quickly. One of the so the character does not fly, claims that she can but does not, and then goes on to deliver this almost ode-like utterance where she repeats the word "thank you." An ode is a poem of gratitude, so that's another way that you can kind of express lightness in a work of writing, or create the feeling of lightness, is to express gratitude, or to have characters express gratitude. So there's this really great litany or list of thank yous, and then really what makes the piece so great is the image of the moths that come in at the end of the story, the cabbage moths. So you have this kind of grand expression of gratitude for the world and the sun and the roof and the window and the light coming in. And then the focus of the story is reduced from the sun to this little cabbage moth. And so we are given an image of flight. Indeed, the flight that the character herself is not engaging in. Yeah, I thought it was really beautiful. It's great. Thank you. I'm glad that you shared that with us before we got to the end. Okay, so I think I think we're done. So let me just say before you go, first of all, as usual, thank you for your comments and for participating, for sharing. It seems like several of you know your Greek mythology pretty well, so I'll try to get some more of that in. So next week, we're going to talk about dialogue. So we will discuss heaviness in 2 weeks. So we'll look forward to that. Okay, any final questions or comments? All right, in that case, you're free to go. Thanks for staying, and I'll see you all soon.